Welcome to Philosophy15. I'm Scott Aikin.
I'm Robert Talisse.
We're the authors of Pragmatism, Pluralism, and the Nature of Philosophy, and Why We Argue and How We Should, a guide to political disagreement in an age of unreason. These are 15-minute philosophy discussions between two philosophy professors. We talk about things that are on our minds or things that we've been thinking about, unscripted. And today, we're going to talk about the question, what is political liberalism? Rob's been thinking about this for quite a while now. So, Rob, what is political liberalism?
So, I think the first thing to note is that political liberalism as a term is a kind of technical term. Political liberalism is the term that is used to talk about a particular trend in liberal political philosophy. So let's spell out what liberal political philosophy is, what liberalism in the philosophical sense is, and then talk about what political liberalism is. Because after all, you might say, what other kind of liberalism is there? Liberalism is a political position. Political liberalism, is...
How is liberalism not political?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
what's the alternative? So liberalism is a sort of framework for conceiving and theorizing the political world. It's a long-standing tradition that goes back, at least to Locke, in thinking of political phenomenon, thinking of politics and the political order as an arrangement among equals by which political power, which is always coercive, is exercised among them. Now, when we put it that way, it might be obvious, but in case not, let me spell it out. Liberalism is an attempt to solve a certain kind of moral problem that lies at the heart of modern politics. By modern politics, I mean politics with a state, right? Politics with this massive site of resources and force and power. Namely, liberalism is the attempt to try to render the moral equality of persons consistent with there being a stable political order. If, just to spell out the problem more bluntly, if what politics is the exercise of coercive force, it looks as if, at least prima facie, it looks as if, there can't be politics in that sense among equals.
Right.
Politics is always going to involve a violation of equality because there's somebody exerting the force and somebody being
dominated.
Good. So liberalism is the attempt to say that, no. It is possible for there to be a relatively just and stable political order among moral equals.
So this makes it a particularly anti-Aristotelian view.
Good.
Because because the Aristotelian view has got a handful of thoughts, which are that there are folks who are just better than others, right? And they should be the ones who are in charge. And
right.
There are natural slaves and things like that. And also the political order is an extension of other sort of larger organic entities, right? So
that's right. So note, here's the crucial commitment of liberalism. The way to render consistent the idea of a state that wields massive political power over people, despite the fact that those people over whom the power is exercised are moral equals, is to try to show how among moral equals that arrangement, that particular set of institutions and policies and procedures for deploying power among them is justifiable. So it's the idea, and by the way, you can see social contract theories tend to be, not always, we've got Hobbes, remember,
right.
Social contract theories tend to be liberal theories, right?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
So the idea is that the way a political order could be legitimate among political equals, despite the fact that politics is always involves the exercise of coercive force among equals, the way all that can be legitimated is if you show that that arrangement is justifiable to the persons qua equals, or as Jeremy Waldron says, justifiable to every last one. Right? Okay, good. Now, traditional liberal theories, think about standard social contract theories, standard utilitarian theories that are liberal. Not all utilitarians are liberal. Traditional liberal philosophies have run according to the following structure, right? Well, the task is to show how the liberal political order is justifiable to every last person living under it. How do you do that? Give a philosophical defense of the liberal political order. Show that the liberal political order is best respecting of individual rights, is best securing of individual liberties, is best protective of what's good for human beings, and then show that each individual now has a sufficient conclusive reason to consent.
So this longer story, this earlier story was one that started with a theory of what's good, and then showed that the political orders are productive of that, or the most reliable way of getting that. Is that right? Mm. So, and this was a place where we were able to see a lot of kind of consilience from a lot of different political theorists about liberalism. This is one of the surprises that Mill and Kant seem to both come together on that. So what's the problem with that? It looks like you get all these folks from these various theories of the good overlapping and giving all sorts of consilience about liberalism. That looks awesome. So yeah, everyone.
So here's the problem. Here's the problem with what I'm contrasting political liberalism with what we're just calling traditional liberal theories.
Yeah.
So traditional liberal theories begin with a philosophical articulation of the right or the good or something that's supposed to be the philosophical motivation for each of us to give our consent or to give our support.
Liberalism is the means to that end.
Right. That's right. Good.
Okay.
Now here's the problem. Right. The problem is that traditional liberal theories have to give a philosophically meaty, a philosophically substantive conception of what human beings are, what human nature is like, what's good for human beings, so on and so forth, so that they can show that sort of recognizably liberal political arrangements are the best expression of, the best tools for, the best instruments towards sort of securing that good or respecting that nature.
Okay.
Now, here's the big thought that John Rawls has in his what we call his later work. So he's got his Theory of Justice book. It comes out in the early 70s. Then in the early 90s, he has this second book called Political Liberalism. I myself, I think this is a minority report. I think the second book is the more philosophically formidable book. Because I think that Rawls is the first to give proper and full articulation to a problem inherent within liberalism, now understood as that traditional enterprise.
Okay.
Here's the problem. Traditional liberalism has to give this substantive or philosophically meaty account of what's good, what's right, what human nature is like, so that it can get its philosophical justification off the ground. The thing that Rawls sees, the deep thought driving the later Rawls, is that the very conditions that are secured by a liberal state create a plurality of conceptions of what's good for human beings, what's right, what human nature is, what makes a human life successful, what human most fundamental aspirations are. So the freedom, the autonomy, the security, the stability of liberal societies creates minds that diverge over these fundamental philosophical matters. Now, traditionally, traditional liberals say, well, yeah, of course, but all we got to
I've got a really good argument for
all I got to do is just give the right argument for liberalism. And if you're interested in thinking through these political questions, you're going to see that utilitarianism is true. And once you see that utilitarianism is true, I'm going to give you Mill's style, the defense of individual spontaneity and individuality and free expression and all the rest. And that's how you get liberalism. The Rawlsian thing is like, no, wait a minute. Let's just take, of all of the views that freedom, that cognitive freedom produces or allows for, take all of the views that are possible to think, lop off the ones that are intrinsically, overtly inconsistent with the idea of the moral equality of all persons and the need for political arrangements to be justified to them. So narrow down all of the moral and philosophical and theological views so that we're talking only about those views that are consistent with the fundamental premise of a liberal political order.
Right.
Now what are you going to do?
So
you've got to justify the liberal political order to all of them.
Yeah.
But they don't agree. They all want a liberal order, but they disagree about what the precise nature, what the details are going to be. And you can't do philosophy to get the justificatory story going, because a liberal political order creates conditions under which there will be a plurality of liberal philosophical, moral, and theological doctrines, all of which are consistent with the basics of a liberal society, but inconsistent with each other.
So a regular complaint about about that feature of the Rawlsian program was that sort of painting bullseyes around where the bullet holes are, right? But your pushback on that is to say, well, look, I'm not arguing with the non-liberals, and the answer is no. It's actually harder. I didn't make things easier. I made things harder because of the fact that the conditions under which these liberal views occur actually creates greater variety than the other cases.
Good. So a standard sort of early kind of pushback against political liberalism,
yes,
which is the kind of liberalism that recognizes that liberalism might invoke a justificatory demand that it itself cannot meet because it creates the conditions under which there could be no single philosophical story about the nature and design and justification of a liberal society that's going to be acceptable to all liberally inclined citizens, right? That's what political liberalism is. Yeah. Standard kind of pushback, it comes out early, and I think it's sort of decisively responded to, although you still see it raised as sort of like a show-stopping critique, is, well, the Rawlsian story sort of lowers the bar for political justification because it says, well, yeah, the liberal political order has to be justifiable to everyone living under it, but by everybody living under it, I just mean all the liberals. So you're really justifying the liberal political order to people who are already liberals. You're not giving any non-liberal a reason to become a liberal. You're just telling a justificatory story for the people who don't need it, right?
And that's a different project anyhow. But
good. Yeah, now notice, just think of one example. Richard Rorty sort of takes this line. Yeah. By the way, Richard doesn't see this as a criticism. Sees now that Rawls has become a liberal ironist.
Has become a Rortian, that's right.
Yeah, political justification, these are just sort of edifying stories we tell about our own ethnocentric, proclivities.
This is a case of Rorty turning an objection into an argument for a view.
This is exactly right. Now, what I think is the real contribution here of the later Rawlsian project of political liberalism is this problematic. The Rawlsian story is not, no, I haven't made things easier by constraining the population to whom political justification is owed simply to the liberals. I've actually shown that there's a deeper problem. Rawls wants to say, the problem of justifying the liberal political order is often thought to be a problem of how to justify the liberal political order to Aristotelians and other people who are not inclined to liberal policies, not inclined to liberal politics. Later, Rawls says, even if you bracket those guys off for just a moment, The justificatory problem for liberalism might be insoluble even if justification is owed only to those who are inclined to liberalism, because the liberal political order has to be justified to them, which means whatever justifying story you tell to them has to be consistent with, that is, has to be not reasonably rejectable by any liberally inclined citizen. So you can't tell a utilitarian story, you can't tell a dignity story in Kantian terms, you can't tell a story about natural rights. Why? Because there are liberal doctrines that are non-utilitarian, non-Kantian, and don't believe in natural rights, but you've got to justify to them. Here's one sort of quick way to characterize the what I think is the deep insight. What the later Rawls sees that hadn't been seen before is that a successful justification for a liberal political order has to aspire to something more, higher than truth. A successful liberal justification for a liberal political order has to be better than merely true. It has to be not rejectable from any liberal point of view. The real problematic that haunts the later Rawls is that it might be impossible to formulate such a justification. The positive project that is called political liberalism is the project of formulating a defense, a justification of a liberal political order that's not merely correct, but not rejectable from any reasonable point of view. That's, I think, what will survive of Rawls's.
We're going to add on one more minute, because you said something that was really surprising to me a little bit earlier on, that this program is the more philosophically robust than what we saw from Theory of Justice. So, like, deeper than the veil of ignorance in the original position, and all of the deep insights that are supposed to be behind those sort of
by the way,
procedures.
That was not that wasn't.
This isn't
meant
to say that it's bad.
It wasn't meant to imply that Theory of Justice is shallow. No, it's every bit as deep as you think. It's every bit as deep as you think it is.
Okay.
It's that political liberalism is the philosophically, because of the depth of the problematic it sees.
Yeah.
That even if we constrain the audience to whom justification is owed simply to the people who are ready to be justified to, we might not.
They even want it. They even want that
stack the deck in favor of liberalism, you still might not be able to get a successful political justification off the ground. That's seeing a deep problem that hadn't been seen before. The Theory of Justice is a book committed to developing a novel and deep and important solution to a problem we already saw.
Yeah.
Right? How to structure the basic structure, how to design the basic structure of society so that it's consistent with, so that it's just. That is, so that it's consistent with a conception of persons as equal sharers in a common social fate. Part of that deep project is the project of seeing that it's not enough simply to design a basic structure so that it's got the right distributive principles. You got to do that. You also have to design a basic structure so that it's got the right distributive principles, that it both gets the right outcomes, respects equality, and here's the part that people don't always recognize is really what's driving a theory of justice. It's a pretty tall order. You got to get the right principles. They got to treat people as equals. And the basic structure that is designed by those principles also has to be such that free and equal people living under those institutions are going to come to want justice. Yeah. So it's a moral project. This is why a theory of justice, I would say, is one of the landmarks in a long tradition that goes all the way back at least to Plato of political theory, which is, how do people living under political institutions come to want their political order to be just, even when the justice of the political order is in some sense of their interests, not always best for their narrow interests. A Theory of Justice is a book that stands in that great tradition. It's a solution and a novel and a deep and important one to a problem and a set of problematics that we're familiar with. Political liberalism, I think, points to and tries to resolve and gives a novel and deep attempt to resolve
a different kind of problem.
To a problem that I don't think we'd fully appreciated before.
All right, Philosophy 15, going 20 minutes this time, though.